Hello and welcome to Varn Blog Solo. A very long time ago, when I was about 19 in 1999, I was sitting in a freshman level mass communication class and listening to the lectures about stakeholders and gatekeepers, which was one of the first lessons we had in mass communications. Now, for a person from zine culture, which I'd done mostly in my early teens, and I say early teens, I started writing zines as soon as we got access to a copy machine at a friend of mine's work. I didn't have the money to print it myself, and my stepfather had a computer from when he was a petit bourgeois tool salesman before he went back to being a mechanic. And we had access to this old computer, and we would type stuff up, and my friend would use his I believe his mom's access to a photocopier, and we make 100 copies. Now, we didn't have any gatekeepers. I wrote about what I wanted to, a 14-year-old sense of music culture and whatever, and we would send our stuff off to indie distributors and the Fact Sheet 5 and various Yahoo email groups, etc. And you know, uh I learned to write that way in many ways, and I'm a phasic even back then, so it was error riddled, it was juvenile. We met with stuff on punk politics and whatnot, but again, I didn't understand it enough to really make heads or tails of it. But we really felt political. I mean, we would put out stuff for pro movement Abdul Jamal and Leon Peltier, um, because learned about it on email groups, usually related to the band Rage Against the Machine, to be quite honest. We're in a very different attention economy today, though. And we still have gatekeepers, but they're not as obvious. Now, there's a lot of anger at the mainstream press, and there should be. I'm not pro or anti Substack. I'm not here to tell you that the old way was good because it wasn't. But I do think that we've seen a lot of development of pseudo-politics around the attention economy. And what do I mean by pseudo-politics? I mean politics that isn't even really punditry or isn't really even um, advice on how to vote or how to do parapolitical stuff or pre-political stuff, which I still think is ultimately political, but you're doing it for specific reasons. No, it's pseudo-politics because it doesn't lead to even para-state related social organizing. Now, I might not like a lot of protest and activist politics. I might think they're ineffective and kind of pseudo-politics themselves, but I'm not talking about that here. You are doing something. There's a chance that it will have an effect. Political fandoms, though, and people who get attached to specific streamers, YouTubers, or pundit personalities, um, a lot of this really is politics as a consumption choice for your entertainment. And it makes sense if you look at the trends right now that people are moving away from that, although you still have Trump watchers in the Trump denouncement machine. Um and you can get caught up in the everyday grind of that. But that's actually depoliticizing. Most forms of tailism, and by tailism I mean tailing another political group, are what you imagine a social class's mores to be, instead of standing up for your own and trying to attract the class to that. um, has a similar character in that it posits an ideal type of a vision of politics. It sells that to people as a critique, usually of their colleagues at work, if I'm frank. And then it leads to you just blindly following the news and proclaiming that somehow to be political. And there's a lot of people who really want you to make that confusion because their bottom line is increased by it. It's just a fact. Parasocial identification, not just with the pundit, but also with the idea that your consumption choices are actually a political choice, which is a misfiring. It's a misrecognition of where you are. Now, I use the term pseudo-politics advisedly because a lot of people who talk about pseudo-activity and pseudo-politics have an ideal type of activity or politics that they never express. They don't bring it up. They don't deal with it. They don't talk about it. And so you are left trying to find their politics, and it's almost a way of ideological Stockholm syndrome. You you do pseudo activity. Someone you respect critiques that as pseudo activity, and then you're constantly trying to live up to their demands of what real activity is. But real activity may be just cheerleading for a faction in the current state or whatever. This is not really any way to become a political subject. It's that's obvious. But the other thing the attention economy does is hides the gatekeepers and the stakeholders a lot more. You can funnel a lot of investment through a Patreon and people think it's organic engagement and no one can tell. I mean, even for tax purposes, it's a little bit hard to parse out. And it is a game that people play to get high donors who may actually even be investors that you've worked out stuff to pay through your Patreon to get you up in the Patreon rankings. And then once you've done that, you can pivot, get organic growth, because inorganic growth and organic growth grow the same way in the internet age. People will buy 100,000 views in a place in India, and it's probably not going to help your site stats a super amount, but it will get you listed in the algorithm, although it might be in the algorithm in Bangladesh or some server farm in the developing world. But there's an increasing pressure to carve out a niche and do so by offering a novel politics. Even if the novel politics is mainly just the kind of cheerleading for some faction in the current politics that one might want to do. And it gives you a feeling of being anti-systemic and highly politically engaged, but it's actually a politically disengaging thing. It's a movement that moves you outside of politics and not in it. This has affected the viewpoints of entire generations. Now, we can't pretend we don't live in a world where social media doesn't matter anymore. We can't say that that's not the real world, because for a lot of people under 35, it is. And, you increasingly need at least, phone Wi-Fi to even apply for jobs. So we should quit that talking point, but we should also realize that sociality and political responsibility of a political subject is not something that you get solely from capturing eyes or bots on X/Twitter, or getting the group on Bluesky all together, or whatever you're doing. Your TikTok reels, which you know can have massive eyes on them, several million sometimes, and have very little effect. So pseudo politics is the advisable term because this is about your consumption choices. This is about your own identity. And people who sell you a unique identity will try to take advantage of that. It's the same thing as fandoms and other forms of life, except that this is portrayed as having some kind of consequence. So, as bad as the old attention economy was, the current one is just as corrupt. And in some ways, you are at the rim of tech overlords about the algorithm's prioritization of what you're doing. And the way it works on YouTube, for example, is if you're monetized, you might get demonetized as a form of gatekeeping. It's still there. It's now just diffuse and even harder to know. You don't know what your direct relationship is to your sponsors. You don't know who's making the decisions. And you have every reason to try to capture different groups by novel positions. This is similar to academia. In academia, there is a dual impulse that is contradictory. On one hand, to get tenure, you need to actually fit in with the group of professors that already have tenure and work your way up that way. On the other, which means that freedom of freedom of study or academic freedom is really only enabled the tenured, who get to make decisions about what they want to publish or not, because tenure is usually done by the committee, the people who are already tenured. Which leads to a kind of double bind. You need to be novel and produce novel work. Indeed, arguably to get your PhD or your MFA or any kind of terminal degree, you've had to contribute something new to the discourse. But also, it needs to be safe enough that you can get tenure and not totally be ostracized of the kind of power systems in most academic departments. Now, media works even weirder than that, because the novelty is there, but so is the pressure for audience capture. You don't want to piss off your audience. You have to stay with it. Now, I can piss off my audience because, frankly, this is not my primary means of making a living. But if I had to sweat every subscriber every time, I would have to start uh, capitulating to my audience as a form of survival. And if I carve out a niche, that means that you also have a way for this to become more and more extremophile, that you can have more and more extreme attention economic politics with less and less influence on actual politics whatsoever. And some people want to sell you this as a politics, but it's really them selling you a brand of infotainment. So the attention economy in the new media world is not a whole lot better than the attention economy in the old mainstream media world, which is dying. But it's a lot harder to understand and follow who's actually making the gatekeeping decisions and how. My challenge to you is, I'm not saying don't enjoy the podcast you enjoy, don't enjoy the media you enjoy, just don't confuse it with actual politics. Even in the pre-political form. In the pre-political form, you're building stuff locally to be able to intersect with people nationally and work cross-sectional. I mean, for example, I work with a group here in Utah that I'm not going to name, but we work with labor unions, and we are almost all in some kind of labor union or labor association. Not all of us, but most of us. And we, do discussions about the statistical fields of the job. We talk about training people to unionize. We talk about how to deal with our various sectional needs, because they're often quite different legitimately. What helps a Teamster may not help the UAW, and what helps a teacher may not help someone in the bus union. And so to actually form a united front on these things, these kind of organizations have to exist, and they're effectively pre-political. We're not a party. We don't have a party. There's no way for us to become a party because of Taft-Hartley, but we are kind of a coordination group. That's something you can actually do, in addition to join whatever political groupings you want to do. But particularly when things are as chaotic as they are right now, consuming the media can feel so dramatic and engaging that you can feel like you're politically active. And again, that isn't new. I mean, I think about the Bush years and the media responses to the Bush years, and how a bunch of lame ass baby boomers basically set the narrative for those years. So we were talking about pseudo controversies all the time. And because it's consumed as passive media in the eternal spotless mind of the now, within 10 years, you're not going to remember it. It is weird, for example, when I go back to, say, Real Time with Bill Maher, which is a show I hate, but I used to like when I was in my early to mid 20s. And reminding myself how bad actually some of that time was. But how flippant the talking points were, and how you could miss the forest for the trees. And it's not good nor bad that the weird talking points, like whether we're talking about whether or not they're bananas in socialism, or whether we're talking about the dreaded PMC and how all the PMC think that they should fight the PMC to empower workers who they have some weird collective mental imago of that doesn't correspond to any statistical or actual reality. All these things are about self-construction and self-branding. And the attention economy plays into that. If you aren't being novel all the time, you can fall out. And if you're not growing your audience, you're declining. Don't be a rube. We have some new patrons over at Varn Blog, and I'm going to cover them real quickly. I'd like to thank Nolan K for becoming a Khan Kahanan. And I'd like to thank Adriel M for becoming a $14 sponsor. Remember, we do have all kinds of stuff on offer on Patreon. I also keep a free podcast if you'd rather listen to it for free. The interviews are always up there within a month of them coming out on the YouTube channel, but patrons get it even earlier. Usually they get it at 8 o'clock in the morning, the day where I release this at 5, with no commercials and all that fun stuff. So you can have that and lots of additional audio for free. Well, not for free, excuse me, for $4. But I'll continue making most of the great majority of my content for free. That's what I was trying to say. So if you like and subscribe and share, and this means something to you, thank you. Good luck. It would really help me out. Protect your peace.